We now move to private members' business. Motion read driving test waiting times, and I call on Deputy Pa Daly to move the motion.
Garma got Cahir or Cian Corla, should say, and I formally move the motion.
Thank you, Deputy Twin.
Minister, driving test delays, the length and breadth of the country have reached staggering new peaks. There's 72,414 people now in limbo. That's up 60% on 2022, and there's an increase of 10,000 over the last 3 months. And we take no pleasure in the fact that, again, we've been forced to confront the government on this issue. And I'm sure that every deputy in the House from every constituency, rural and urban, has been contacted by people facing interminable delays, people who are trapped in outrageously expensive insurance policies, having to pay more and more for driving lessons, who are waiting on jobs, waiting on courses, and there's deep sense of frustration, and they are dependent on a licence and they're waiting for it. They're also frustrated, obviously, with the government's continued failure to address it. It's not a new issue, because this crisis has been rumbling on for years, and it's another example of a litany of failures by Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael. And their coalition partners now, the Lowry-led independents, they must own up to their role in sorting this out. After all, many of the government supporting rural independents were highly critical of these delays when they were in opposition, and before they decided to support a government in exchange for the new salary positions and the positions and salary bumps, but they forgot to include this important issue in the programme for government. And I hope they still have the same courage of their convictions when they're sitting on government benches. One particular issue that I want to highlight is the impact that it's having on our young people. As the Minister will know, for many young people, having a licence cannot be considered as just an option. It's an absolute necessity, because public transport is either totally non-existent or entirely unreliable in many areas of rural Ireland. And without a valid licence, young people are prevented from going about their daily lives, they're missing out on attending college, they're unable to take up new jobs, all because they're languishing for months on end on waiting lists. This backlog has also pushed up the cost of learning to drive, because learner drivers are trapped in expensive insurance policies for longer than anticipated, often of average of about €3,000 per year, while they anxiously wait to sit their test. We know that this government is out of touch, but even they must realise that further driving up costs for our young people who can barely afford to make ends meet is hardly the way to entice them to stay in the country. One young constituent of mine in County Kerry has been particularly harmed by the government's failure to get a grip on this. He's the sole carer for his father. He must return every night to look out for him. However, without a licence, he's been forced to choose between attending college and looking after his father. But that's not much of a choice. The government needs to wake up. It's been asleep at the wheel for too long, and I'm calling upon the government to agree to this motion, to adopt it, and to increase resources to meet the demand, to hire more permanent instructors, to review the role and funding of the RSA, and to address the gaps in driving test centres all around the country.
Thank you, Deputy. We'll move now to Deputy Louise O'Hara. That's who I am.
Louis. Yeah.
Excuse me, Louis.
This is a very important motion, given the lengthy delays across the people across the state are facing in securing driving tests. Over 72,000 people are currently waiting. That's an increase of 60% since 2022. And this has been an issue for years, but it really is at crisis point now, and action is needed urgently to address this backlog. We know why we were in this situation. There has been a failure to recruit enough driving test instructors. We've been totally over-reliant on temporary instructors. We don't have enough test centres, and it is clear that the RSA does not have the capacity or the ability to address these backlogs, and they are breaching their own service level agreement. This impacts hugely on people, mostly young people, who need to drive and are missing out on employment and educational opportunities as a result. It particularly impacts those who need a driver's licence to begin a job, the likes of bus drivers, paramedics and so on, who we know are badly needed. It leaves people stranded, particularly those in rural communities who do not have public transport available to them. And I think often this government doesn't understand the reality of life in rural Ireland, We don't have good quality public transport. We don't have buses going by our door every few minutes. We rely on cars to transport ourselves, and that will continue to be the reality for many in rural communities for the foreseeable. Young people in rural communities need to be able to drive. It is critical for their independence and to be able to lead an adult life, but many are being denied that opportunity for months on end. It is not fair or sustainable for them to be left having to rely on lifts from friends or family members to get around, and this is leading to social isolation as well. And this is the same generation that are suffering with the housing crisis and rising costs in terms of education and so on, and they can't also be left stuck at home. They need support to live independent lives, and government must step up to the plate to provide for that. In my own county of Galway, the waiting times for an invitation for a driving test range from 15 to 29 weeks, and we have higher figures in other parts of the state. That's totally unacceptable, and it's causing huge difficulties for young people in my constituency and right across the state. Learning to drive is difficult enough and expensive enough as it is. Learner drivers have to pay outrageous insurance premiums, a lot of money for lessons and so on, and these delays only prolong that. We need to ease the burden on them and support young people who are starting off in their adult life to get the opportunities that driving can present to them. And it's very clear that more resources are needed to meet demand. This means ending the over-reliance on temporary driving instructors and expediting the recruitment of permanent instructors. There must be an urgent review of the RSA's mandate, resourcing and programme of work. Their performance is a key factor in all of this and cannot be ignored. There must be new test centres established, particularly in areas where there are none at present. There are huge gaps in locations, and these must be filled by the RSA as a matter of urgency. And finally, we need some political will from government to ensure that these changes are made and driving tests are easily accessible to those applying for them.
Thank you, Deputy O'Hara. Deputy Johnny Maiden.
Máda Ceann Comhairle agus Ara. Ceann Comhairle, in our county of Wexford at this moment of time, if I apply for a driving test, I will get my invite test date for the 25th of August 2025. Then I would have to wait another 3 to 5 weeks after that for my actual driving test date. As of the 21st of the 1st 25, the application volume in County Wexford was 5,643. The volume per centres are Gorey 2,723 and Wexford 2,920. With the estimated weeks to invite being 20 weeks and 25 weeks respectively, and you can add another 3 to 5 weeks onto that. The national figure states there are 72,000 people awaiting driving test. Many rural parts of Wexford people are waiting on the driving test depend totally on family and friends to bring them to their place of employment or education level institutions, as public transport is not an option or in most cases not available. My own constituency, I'll give you 2 prime examples of the burden of incompetence is causing thousands of young people and their families across the whole country. I had a father of two young men who were in their early 20s, both working, both waiting months on end for a driving test. However, that man had to get up at 5:30 a.m. each morning to bring his 2 sons to work. They worked in 2 different locations, which meant a round trip of approximately 60 kilometres. He then had to turn around and go to work himself and repeat the journey when he returned home that evening. Another man who was self-employed, he had to bring his daughter to work at a local village shop about 20 kilometres away, again an early start in the morning and a return trip in the evening. The result was she had to give up her job, as her father's work took him miles away in the opposite direction. Minister, this surely must indicate to you the system is not fit for purpose and is failing. If this were another sort of business, it would be put through a root and branch reform, especially when you consider the exchequer funding is expected to be in the region of almost £1 million this year, and according to the government's revised estimates, the RSA's income are anticipated to reach almost £90 million. People are paying for a good service, therefore it is reasonable to expect a top quality service in return. However, this is certainly not the case when you see the huge backlogs. To finish up, I must say how disappointed the people of Wexford are with the recent allocation of road maintenance and road funding of £23,310,000, down almost £150,000 from last year. This despite a full comprehensive engineering report stating that 1/3 of the roads need full reconstruction, estimated to a cost in the region of £190 million. Wexford once again shortchanged.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Joanna Byrne.
Minister, the statutory maximum waiting time for a driving test is 10 weeks and no test centre around the country is meeting that, not even close to it. There is no driving test in Drogheda, the largest town in Ireland, the 6th largest urban centre in the state, the next future city of this country, with no driving test centre of its own. People in South Louth and East Meath have to travel to do their driving tests, usually to Navan or Dundalk, but sometimes to Dublin due to waiting times. They have to drive on unfamiliar roads with no local knowledge, and it may be the only time they ever drive those roads. To add to the inconvenience of having to travel for driving tests, the waiting time in Navan Test Centre is 35 weeks. In Dundalk, it's 23 weeks. There are 76 test centres around the country, and in some cases, towns far smaller than Drogheda have 2 test centres. People in Drogheda don't begrudge that, but it is genuinely farcical at this stage that a permanent driving test centre cannot be found in Drogheda, the largest town in the country, after 7 years of searching. Up and down the country, there are driving test centres operating out of offices and rooms in hotels, yet you can't seem to locate a single building in Drogheda that is suitable for a test centre. According to the RSA, there were 14 sites inspected in Drogheda last year. Of those 14 sites, 7 were deemed not suitable, but no reason was given. In other sites, traffic was given as the reason for not allowing a centre at them. Traffic. Can anyone in the government or the RSA really state with a straight face that there are no traffic issues around any other driving test routes throughout the state? In another one, speed ramps was the reason given. Like, traffic and speed ramps are a fact of life for all drivers. It beggars belief that the RSA wouldn't want drivers to be prepared for them. At present, there are 45,000 people living in Drogheda. As you know, Minister, you don't live too far away from us. The population is set to increase by around 20,000 in the next 5 years under the Northern Environs Plan, with 5,000 new homes forecast and underway. We need a driving test centre to serve the large population in a large geographical area spanning across South Louth and East Meath. If you are to reduce the waiting times I highlighted earlier for driving test centres in Navan and Dundalk, a test centre must be opened in Drogheda as soon as possible. The Government and the RSA need to meet their commitments and provide a test within the statutory waiting time. Drogheda has been sidelined for too long. There are no excuses that will suffice any longer, and a permanent test centre for Drogheda has to become a priority for all stakeholders.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Johnny Quirk.
Thanks, Corla. Minister, the waiting times for a driving test in Meath is a disgraceful situation which the Government have been warned about for years. Many people are waiting up to 35 weeks and in some cases even longer to complete their driving test. This is completely unacceptable. Navan has the longest waiting list in the country, with an estimated wait time of 35 weeks for a driving test, and some constituencies waiting even longer. We now have over 72,414 people trapped in limbo, an alarming increase of more than 60% since 2022. In just 3 months, the backlog has ballooned by nearly 10,000. Not a single driving test centre is meeting the statutory maximum waiting time of 10 weeks. Learners are being forced to wait 6 months or more, with some waiting up to 8 months. The repercussions of this backlog are devastating and far-reaching. People of all ages have had to turn down job offers and college placements because they can't obtain their full driving licences, which are often essential for employment and education. Imagine being qualified and ready to work only to be held back by an inefficient system. Students are left stranded, unable to get to college due to a public transport system that cannot meet their needs. How many potential workers are we losing when they are eager to contribute but simply can't drive because of the lengthy driving test waiting list? Those who wish to return from America, for example, face a lengthy barrier in obtaining a full licence here, a situation that could be resolved with a simple bilateral agreement by exchanging their American driving licences for an Irish one. This is a straightforward solution and could facilitate the return of skilled individuals. We already have similar agreements with countries like Canada, France and Germany. I heard the Taoiseach earlier talk about the diaspora and the undocumented. This is his chance to do something. We are crying out for construction workers, healthcare workers, and we need to make it easier for returning immigrants. The recent allocation of funding for road improvements is a drop in the ocean compared to what's truly needed. It's clear that these funds will not cover the urgent repairs essential for the safety of drivers. Government TDs should be ashamed of themselves. Yet the people of Meath pay almost 60 million per year in motor tax. We need immediate action. The Government needs to acknowledge its responsibility. You must expedite the recruitment of permanent driving test instructors, end the over-reliance on temporary staff and conduct a thorough review of the RSA's capacity to manage this crisis. We need more driving test centres and a strategic plan to ensure we achieve that statutory maximum waiting time of 10 weeks and less. I feel sorry for the many workers who contact me and miss out on job opportunities, all because of this backlog. They deserve a system that works for them. The RSA were quick, under the watchful eye of this government, to up their prices, but slow to improve their services.
Thank you, Deputy Kathy Bennett.
I can Carla Atara. In April last year, the Fianna Fáil Minister of State at the Department of Transport, now the Minister for Public Expenditure, described the prior hiring of 30 testers as not enough. He assured us that we would see significant progress in October and the end of the year, and that it would be early next year when we would get back to a 10-week waiting time. Well, it is now early in the next year, and the backlog has increased to nearly 10,000 in the past 3 months. Having increased by over 4,000 since mid-January alone, there is no sign of abatement. Yet another instance of a Fianna Fáil minister over-compromising and over-promising in advance of an election, only to undeliver in the clear light of day. The impact of this failure is very real. More than 1,200 drivers in Cavan and Monaghan stuck paying expensive insurance policies. People have no choice but to use their cars to get to work or to college and to go about their daily lives. I would like to thank my party colleague and Sinn Féin spokesperson on transport, Deputy Pa Daly, for bringing forward this motion and outlining in the first instance the need for you as Minister to take responsibility and to take immediate action to recruit new permanent driving testers rather than continuing to rely upon temporary hires. Because in principle it is straightforward, Minister. When demand for public services increases, it must be matched by resources necessary to meet that demand. It is clear that as of today, the RSA do not have enough capacity to address the backlogs, and that what is needed in drafting an urgent implementation of a plan to achieve the statutory minimum waiting times of 10 weeks. Sinn Féin have outlined what is required. It is now for the Minister to illustrate if he is capable of delivering.
Thank you, Deputy. Now we move to our Minister, Dara O'Brien. Minister.
Sinn Féin Creekna in it. Dús Ceann Comhairle bhualam a week ago as Theachta Dáil agus Colaí as Sinn Féin as an Rúnatáig Flé a Gwyn Anocht. I do welcome the opportunity to address the House and to update you on the National Driver Testing Service. And I do acknowledge the concerns that have been raised by deputies. I also note the lack of some constructive points about what we would do. But to leave that aside, it is an issue. Waiting times are too long, unquestionably. And I agree that it's a vital public service and that the public need an efficient and they need a dependable driver testing service. And when undertaking their journey to pass their driving test and to learn how to drive, and that it is not at this stage at a service level that I believe is acceptable. And in the course of my contribution this evening, I'll tell you what we're doing about that. And for that reason, I can confirm that government won't be opposing this motion this evening. And everyone in the House has heard from constituents, as I have, about the issues and the challenges that extended driver testing wait times have on individuals and on families. And there's no disagreement that the current waiting times are far in excess of what is acceptable. And I would like to assure the deputies across the House that measures have been taken to address the issue. And I expect that we will begin to see progress in the coming months. And I'm prioritising this issue in my engagements with the RSA board, a new chair we appointed this morning as well, and their senior management team. And deputies may be aware opposite of the transformation programme that we're engaging on within the Road Safety Authority as well. Just before I continue, I do think it's important to note that under the Road Safety Act, the Road Safety Authority has statutory responsibility for the National Driver Testing Service. So the opposition motion, or the Sinn Féin motion, has called on me to take immediate action to expedite the ongoing recruitment process. But the legislation passed by the Oireachtas, the operation of that service is in the statutory remit of the RSA. And neither I nor my officials are directly involved in the operation of the service. But steps have, however, been taken to support the RSA so that they can carry out the job that they're mandated to do. And they need to do that, and that's about increasing service capacity and improving service delivery. So as the deputies are aware, the driving testing service wait time is currently far above the service level agreement target of 10 weeks. And a number of deputies here have alluded to that already. As a point of clarity, I must point out that the opposition motion is incorrect, that this target is defined in statute. It is not. Nevertheless, it's an important target and one that the RSA should meet and need to deliver on. So compared to this 10-week wait at the end of January, and for the information of the House, the wait time was 22 weeks. And in some of the busiest test centres, the current wait time is over 30 weeks. And that's far too long. It's unacceptable that that amount of time people have to wait for a test, and it has been trending in the wrong direction. And I do understand the concerns of deputies who have spoken so far, and most importantly, the frustration of individuals who are directly impacted by these delays. Fundamentally, these rising waiting times have been driven by rapidly increasing demand and population growth. And this demand can be seen by the number of learner permits in circulation and by the record number of advanced driving instructors working in the sector to deliver lessons to learner drivers. So 2024 was the busiest year in the history of the service, and I think it's important we put this debate in context. So the RSA receiving just under 275,000 new driving test applications, which was 10% above their own projections for last year. The applications also add to the backlog, which, as deputies will know, arose following the pandemic and has persisted as a result of incoming demand outstripping the RSA's own capacity. Waiting times increased last year from April onwards as the number of driver testers in employment declined due to a mix of retirement, fixed-term contracts reaching their conclusion, and testers taking up alternative offers of employment. To try to meet the demand, there was extensive working of overtime by driver testers to mitigate impact on customers, and incentive programme for testers to deliver additional tests, the introduction of short notice cancel slot systems, and the continuation of a priority list for healthcare workers, which I believe is critically important. So in total, over 250,000 tests were delivered last year. So no deputy opposite has actually mentioned that. 250,000 tests carried out last year. And I have sought to support the RSA in meeting this demand and addressing the issue of lengthy driving test waiting times by sanctioning additional driver tester positions to increase capacity in the system. Deputies have alluded to this already, that in March 23 there were fixed-term contracts for 75 additional drivers for contracts of up to 2 years. The opposition motion questioned this, as is your right to recruit driver testers on a temporary basis, but I think that was the right decision at the time, particularly post-pandemic, to see how that increased amount and that backlog would actually be dealt with. So it's also important to highlight that average driver testing times over that period significantly improved, and from a peak of over 30 weeks in August 2023, that reduced to about 14.9 weeks in 2024. However, the total number of testers in employment at any point never exceeded 176, and as I've already outlined, it actually declined last year in 2024. Following on from this long-term assessment of capacity requirements, the RSA prepared a business case for a permanent sanction of additional driver testers. So on receipt of the business case, the department moved very swiftly to sanction 70 additional driver testing posts on a permanent basis, and that was done in September of last year. So the total permanent sanction driver test headcount is actually 200 today, representing a doubling of the permanent headcount in just over 2 years. So that's 100 extra since June 2022. So I understand this recruitment campaign to hire additional driver testers is at an advanced stage. Offers are currently being made to new recruits and being prioritised for areas experiencing the longest waiting times. So these resources will go to the areas in particular where the longest waiting times are being experienced. A recruitment campaign of this size does take time. I think deputies may appreciate that or may not, but this sanction was in September 2024. These posts will be filled and are being filled, and that will help us move progressively to work towards the 10-week service level agreement target as new testers are trained and brought on board. Furthermore, the RSA believes that the permanent positions now available will attract and retain a higher number of driver testers, so the progress in tackling the waiting times can be better sustained into the future. In relation to the Deputy's concerns on the number of driver testing centres around the country, and I note the point by the Deputy from Louth, specifically about Drogheda. I also note the fact that she might inform her Deputy from Cavan Monaghan that she's acknowledged the 5,000 new homes being built in Drogheda as well. And Drogheda is indeed the fastest growing town in the country, unquestionably. And the RSA will regularly collaborate with the OPW. I'm interested in the points that you raised about the reasons that certain driving testing centres, potential ones, were refused, and I will look into that. I intend to engage with the RSA. They manage their capital programme. They manage their staff. I don't, but I want to see this situation improve. I think we can with the additional posts that are in place, focusing them on the areas with the greatest of need. I've dealt with young people and not so young people as well, who are waiting for new jobs, new positions, who are dependent on the ability to get a timely driver test. I welcome the fact that still the healthcare worker prioritisation will remain in place, and these are matters that I will be addressing directly with the RSA. I'm also aware, in particular, in the case of Drogheda, and I'd mention that lengthy engagements and extensive searches, as you've outlined, have taken place. There should be a driver testing centre in Drogheda. I know my colleague, Minister Thomas Byrne, has met the RSA or will be meeting them shortly. I'm sure deputies opposite are doing likewise to discuss the concerns, so I will continue to do that. In conclusion, the motion today is in line with the principles and policies of government in terms of defining expectations for service levels. Like our state agencies across the board and those within my remit need to be focused on the customer and delivering the service that is there. The backlog was there because of circumstances, particularly through COVID. It was difficult to carry out tests. People will remember social distancing. A backlog built up. That's a fact. That's a reality. That had to be dealt with. Waiting times didn't reduce far enough. So the 70 additional posts focused in the right areas will help. I will be advancing with the RSA in relation to additional driving testing centres also. So I will keep the deputies and indeed the committee, the Oireachtas Committee, informed of progress. I look forward to contributions from members opposite from all parties and independents and indeed in government on this debate, and I will listen to it intently.
Gurmagad Arash Gaji Sinn Féin agus Chokta McGettigan Leatherhull.
Gurmagad Cahirlach, and I'd like to thank our colleague Pa Daly for bringing this forward. Minister, while I welcome that you won't oppose this motion, and yes, many tests have been completed, but the waiting list is growing and growing, and there's no denying that. So are you saying that you cannot step in, that this is all down to the RSA? And we all know a driving licence is not a luxury, it's essential. And not being able to drive could mean missing out on work opportunities, education, family occasions and more. This is especially true outside of large cities. Public transport in rural Ireland leaves a lot to be desired, and many people simply cannot afford to rely on it for work, college, shopping, doctor's appointments or other activities. Before anyone can sit their driving test, they must have held their learner permit for a minimum of 6 months, and they must have successfully completed at least 12 essential driver training lessons. To then have to wait an average of 5 months is unacceptable, and in some cases these tests have been deferred, and this is not helping those who are dependent on their licence for a new job. Someone who requires a driving licence for work cannot afford to wait 11 months to get one, and businesses trying to hire drivers cannot afford it either, and the possible economic knock-on effects on the economy cannot be dismissed. In addition, people who have completed their 12 lessons have just acquired a brand new skill, which they will need to practice, and if they're forced to waste many months, they may start to lose those skills, resulting in them being more likely to fail the test. This is a waste of their time and money, and the money of the state. In addition to the needs for extra testers, we need extra test centres with full-time staff. In my own town of Shannon in County Clare, it has a population of over 10,000, yet we have no test centre, and people are reliant on testers coming in from elsewhere, and they're having to meet learner drivers in hotel car parks. This is just a shambles. And I've been told that there were no tests done in January in Shannon at all. And this is not a new problem, so you must have been aware of this now for years. So I'm glad to see that you will be taking steps, and I hope this will be as a matter of urgency. Gormagat.
Snoddy Leatherholt.
And this is a very important matter, given that a lot of people's work depends on driving nowadays. And while the Minister mentioned progress being made, progress has been so slow, and I can quote, probably like every other TD here, cases where people haven't got access to a test, where they seem to have ended up in whatever hole that the RSA has created to swallow up applications. So you end up with people who are paying extra money for lessons and that to keep their hand in, to make sure that they have the money also for the tests, to ensure that their car isn't just sitting there, but they can't drive that car because they don't have a licence. They can't go to the test centre because they don't have a licence, and their car is often sitting there with insurance and tax paid on it, and they wait and they wait. I've had quite a number of cases in recent months, so it seems to be getting worse, of people who have jobs and the like, who are awaiting work, awaiting clearance, but can't get the test, and quite a substantial amount of money in terms of insurance, and they can't avail of it or work. And there's also the issue of those who have licences from abroad, truck drivers and the like, who come back to Ireland and their licences aren't recognised, and they end up losing the work that they've come home to because they don't have the licence, because there's no recognition. In fact, if in one case he came back from Australia and the licence wasn't recognised, even though he'd gone to Australia with an Irish licence, changed it over there, and then lost out. If he went north, he would be recognised straight away. And then there's the issue of the theory tests, and the fact that that's a money-making scam, because you're robbing, especially young people who are trying to pass the first hurdle, and yet you're asking them for quite a lot of money and then changing the rules time in, time out. And the fact that there isn't that many test centres, theory test centres, it's only four in Dublin. Use the library services; it'd be a lot easier. It is digital, and you'd be putting money back into the local authorities if you use the library service. Reduce the amount that's been charged on young people, and make sure that this happens every single year that I've been in the Dáil. Minister stood over there and says how great they're doing, and how these tests will be reduced, the waiting list will be reduced. It hasn't happened.
Dr. Cullinan.
Minister, 72,000 learner drivers languishing on waiting lists. 10,000 of those have come onto the waiting lists in the last 3 months alone. I don't think you can blame anybody but the government for that one. The target of a maximum 10-week wait time, and the Minister says it's not a statutory target. Maybe it should be, and that's the possibility of the opposition bringing forward a bill, Minister, to rectify that. I hope the Minister will support it. And you talked about solutions, so this isn't rocket science, and this is fairly easily to identify what the problem is, and it's very easy to identify what the solution is, Minister. We don't have enough driving instructors. We have a lot of temporary instructors, but there's many areas where we know there are gaps where we don't have enough driving instructors. So what's the solution? We hire more driving instructors. We don't have enough test centres. Some of them, again, are temporary. In some areas, we don't have any test centres. So we've identified the obvious solution to get the RSA and the OPW to identify the gaps and to make sure that every city and county has enough test centres. So it's not rocket science. The fact that that's beyond the comprehension or the ability of the government to resolve is the problem. Well, it is, because there are many people who don't have the tests within the target timeframes that they should. You'll get a chance maybe to respond again later, Minister. And I want to just read out one example of a young man that contacted me from Waterford. He's not interested in glib responses from you. He's interested in you coming up with solutions and actually dealing with the problem. He needs his licence for work. He finished his lessons and was signed off at the start of September. He was originally told that he would be invited for a test by the 10th of January. He was then told it would be the 17th of March at the earliest, and possibly further than that, and then he'd have to wait another 3 or 4 weeks after that to get the test. That's the reality, Minister, unfortunately. And unless we have more driving instructors, unless we have more permanent test centres, then many more people are going to have to wait longer for the test, and it's unfair on them, and it's something that can be fixed.
Dr. Kenny.
Minister, since I was in the transport portfolio, I'd said, what, a year and a half ago now, the predecessor told me that this has all been solved and been sorted out and going in the right direction. I remember Jack Chambers standing here and actually telling us that they were recruiting more driving test instructors, that they were going to open more testing centres. All of this was in hand, everything was sorted out. But the truth is, since then, it has gone in the opposite direction. And the figures bear this out. There's over 72,000 people now on the waiting list. It's the longest it's ever been. Some of them are up to 8 months on the waiting list. And, you know, it simply isn't good enough. If you were to apply for a driving test today in Sligo, you would wait 7 months to get that driving test. If you were to apply for one in Leitrim, you wait up to 6 months to get that driving test. And, you know, it's outrageous because people who live in rural communities and in rural areas simply can't manage without their car. That's what they need to get to work. That's what young people, particularly starting out, that's the only method they have of travelling, because we don't have the public transport infrastructure in urban areas. So I think, Minister, there needs to be a recognition that government has dropped the ball in respect of this. And, you know, to pass the buck on to the RSA and say they haven't done this or haven't done that or everything has been done that can be done simply doesn't stand up. And we need to recognise that we have an awful lot of work to do, because people have to get to appointments, people need their car to get to work, to get to hospital appointments, to get their children to school. All of these things, as you cut transport in every other way. I mean, we fight every year in here when it comes to September to get people on school buses, for school bus transport. Many people who live in rural areas can't get the school bus. They need their car to bring their children to school, and particularly younger couples, and maybe one of them has to get a driving licence. I had a case recently of a doctor who contacted our office who returned from America. He couldn't transfer his US licence and ended up for several months having to get a taxi when he was on late nights to call into the hospital in and out to work. And if he was to drive a car, he had to get somebody who was a qualified driver to be along with him. I mean, this is another preposterous situation where people who return here from the US can't get their driving licences transferred over. And it needs to be resolved. And I know, Minister, you agree with me that it needs to be resolved, but why isn't it resolved? And these are the issues that we need to deal with. And there needs to be a sense of urgency around them rather than continually passing the buck. So, you know, what we're asking for here this evening is an implementation of a plan, a strategic plan to achieve this magic 10-week waiting list. And if we can do that, that's what needs to happen. I recognise that your government is not going to oppose the motion. Well, not opposing it isn't enough. You need to act on it, and you need to ensure that we deliver the 10-week waiting times that is the least people should expect.
Minister, there's over 8,000 learner drivers in total are languishing on waiting lists in Wicklow and Wexford. Some are waiting over 8 months, and this is totally unacceptable. And then after that, a young person could be fleeced with exorbitant insurance costs of sometimes up to €2,000 to €3,000, which is very frustrating. However, then comes another real shock, and that is trying to navigate and drive safely on County Wexford's rural roads network, which is literally disintegrating before our eyes, especially after recent bad weather. Now, after the Celtic Tiger years, the government reduced roads funding dramatically to County Wexford, which left a €67 million hole in the County Wexford's rural roads budget. Now, even the 2021 storm works, including bridge repairs, are only being completed now. Across the state, there's 15% on average of the roads are in poor condition. However, in County Wexford's case, this rockets up to 28%, almost double. And the roads, I suppose, in Wexford, going by technical surveys, have been left behind for 30 years, and that's from official road surveys by engineers' reports and the NOAC report also. And a technical analysis, Minister, done by Wexford County Council estimated that €194 million is now needed to address the crisis with County Wexford's rural roads, which is a massive safety issue. Now, the local authority simply cannot bridge this gap with its own resources, and it's certainly not fair on motorists who are having their cars wrecked on such terrible roads. It's also a very serious road safety issue, whether you're a young learner driver or an experienced one, having to swerve, zigzag across the rural roads to avoid hitting huge potholes, some even craters. You could almost wash a child in some of them. They're absolutely massive, and broken verges, while at the same time meeting oncoming traffic, so you can see how such a danger that would be. So, Minister, in a parliamentary question recently, I called on you to start allocating funding to the counties based on road condition rather than road length at present. And the response I received was rather ridiculous. It was basically the Minister said that he would disincentivise county councils from repairing bad roads if they were to allocate funding based on road condition. Now, I think this is absolutely nonsensical and unacceptable to everybody, and it's something I won't be letting rest in this chamber. And as with the driver licence issue, this too is a huge matter for the Road Safety Authority. And finally, I'm just calling on the Minister to immediately intervene with emergency funding for County Wexford to deal with the disintegrating road condition, because no other country in Europe has to put up with this, no other county in Ireland indeed puts up with this, so why should we in Wexford? So I need this to be addressed immediately as an emergency safety issue. Thank you.
Mágad Alaskan Chorlia agus go Hordichas as the Fusnu Alaskan Chorlia. Ara, I suppose I want to reiterate what has been said in the chamber here tonight. The fact that we have so many, especially young people, who are waiting ridiculously long periods of time in order to access a driving test. And in Galway, for example, the waiting list is over 3,000. 3,000 people who are waiting to get a driving test so that they can commute for work. And a big issue that I've come across now is commuting for housing. These people are waiting now for over 7 months, although we're told that it should be a 10-week period. People are waiting for over 7 months. And Minister, as you'll know, at this very moment in time, there's no HAP properties available in Galway City in the HAP limits, which means that so many people have to move out into more rural areas to access housing. These people now are waiting. I've met with one woman this week who's waiting 6 months in order to try and get a driving test, which would enable her to go further out to try and access housing while she is currently homeless. There's young people who are studying who need the car in order to commute, who are waiting on their driving test. One woman contacted me today to say that she was supposed to get it in February. It was pushed back to March. She expects it to be pushed back even further, while all the same time not able to commute by herself into university or access her third-level education easily, because, of course, as we know, in the west of Ireland, there are huge issues in terms of access to public transport. And at the same time, she's also having to pay extra in terms of insurance. Another man told me that he had put in waiting for 3 months. He noticed that he still hadn't heard anything back with regards to his driving test, and then he discovered that they had absolutely no record of him ever applying for a driving test. And that was only the first in a litany of issues that he had in terms of accessing that driving test. We hear an awful lot from government that they're going to sort this out. It's high time that it is sorted out, but let this motion be a first step to doing so.
Margaret, the difficulty that people right across the state in accessing a driving test, particularly those who rely on the test centre in Tallaght, is something that I've been raising in this chamber for not just for years, but for several Dáils. I remember raising the fact that the waiting list in Tallaght had passed the 5,000 and urging that immediate action be taken before things completely spiralled out of control. That was with Minister Shane Ross, and it was back in 2020. I remember raising the matter with the Minister Eamon Ryan when the number passed 10,000. And here we are now, and there are over 18,000 people waiting in Tallaght. Minister, that's a population the size of Clonmel or Malahide, and all waiting on a test in one centre. Will I be raising this at Easter when it becomes 20,000? I think it's a fair question. I want answers in relation to when you're going to clear this. When I asked Eamon Ryan about, he was talking about new testers, he couldn't tell me, would he be able to deal with the background. So clearly there's a need for additional test centre in South Dublin. Dunleary was the second highest when Eamon Ryan was there. Population has exploded, as we heard, in the last 20 years, but they're even new towns since the last centre was opened. As the population grows, the provision of centres must grow with it. Otherwise, there will be no bottlenecks, and that's just not common sense. Additional testers and centres are welcome, but that only allows us to tread water. We've had temporary testers in the past, and that only slowed the rising numbers. It didn't do anything to break into the backlog. So we should encourage the use of public transport as the first option. That's not always a practical solution, as you've heard tonight. If people want to get a job in Intel, for instance, It might be a half an hour drive on a good day, but it'll take about 2.5 hours to get from Tallaght. There's no direct route, and that's the problem right across. So we have to stop this discrimination against drivers. So, Minister, give us answers of how you're going to solve this, maybe when you get a chance.
Thank you, Deputy Daly. I want to thank all the contributors who spoke tonight, and I acknowledge that the government is not going to be opposing the motion, but it's unfortunate that this is not the first time that this issue has been raised. And I agree, obviously, that when the government says that the figures are unacceptable. But it must be deeply frustrating for anybody listening in or watching in tonight, any of the 72,000 people that are on the waiting lists, any of the people that are waiting 6 to 8 months for a driving test, and the thousands of people even in my own county of Kerry, the people who are paying exorbitant over-the-top insurance costs, people who are paying huge amounts for extra driving tests while they are waiting to get on and have their cases heard. The returned immigrants who are returning from, for example, the States where they have a full driving licence, who are awaiting a licence for work so that they can take up employment here, but their licences are not recognised. And still, you know, all the times that you've been going over to St. Patrick's Day, can you not sort this small thing out in some sort of an agreement with the United States? People who cannot access employment, such as crucial frontline employment like paramedics and people who are ambulance drivers and a whole lot. People who are trying to access courses that they require in order to take up employment and other frontline services. But it must be frustrating for them to hear some of the excuses that have been said tonight. COVID was raised. I think there was mention by Mr. Darragh O'Brien of the post-pandemic, the public health measures, the social distancing and the pandemic era. To be hearing that from them when numbers have increased by 60% since 2022 when the restrictions ended. It also must be frustrating to hear the Minister say that it's not the government's problem, but the RSA haven't dealt with the situation. You're in government, you're the ones that should have been sorting it out over the past number of years. And it reminds me of the delays in security in Dublin Airport when staff were laid off and it became so difficult then to hire full-time staff. And that's what we're calling on the government to do in essence. There was also frustration from our side in hearing Minister O'Brien asking for solutions and saying that there was a problem with solutions being offered. We're asking for more full-time instructors, we're asking for more resources to put into it, and we're asking for the government to take this matter seriously once and for all.